My name's Jimmy. I'm an addict. I told your speaker tonight I could be nice or I could be honest. You tell me what you want me to do. Kind of hard to do both. I give you a little both. It's an honor to introduce somebody you sponsor. To get up here to do this. For me, it just feels good. I'm very proud of this person. Sponsoring him a long time, and you'll not find someone a whole lot more passionate about recovery. I'll tell you this though, we're impulsive people, but when it comes to recovery, he's extremely serious, and he is not impulsive. So he was looking for a new sponsor a number of years, and me and another guy made the short list. Now, this is about a 4-month interview process. And I know the other guy very well, and I used to call, how'd your third interview go? And I think it went pretty well. I said, I felt pretty good about mine too. So I'm not kidding. Not even a little. So my first conversation as a sponsor with him, I was in Macon, Georgia, and I just got in the car and the phone rang. And I talked to him all the way to Atlanta, and I sat in Jaquila, Georgia for 15 minutes to finish up the conversation and thought, oh my God, what have I done? But he is a great man. We have worked steps, we have yelled at each other, we have cried together, walked through a lot of stuff. And the one thing I can tell you is you will struggle to find someone more passionate about Narcotics Anonymous. He will give his shirt off his back. He will drive 12 states to go and help another recovering addict. And I love that about him. And he's my brother, and he's so happy and honored and humbled to do this. And me get to introduce him is a big thrill. So with that, I'll give you Seamus C.
So I talk loud. Is this too loud? It will be later when I get wound up. So just give me some type of signal. I'm an addict named Seamus. And I'm extremely grateful to be clean and to be here tonight. First of all, thank you for the convention committee asking me to do this. I was sharing with people. I said, God, what an honor to be asked to be a convention speaker. And then to be a convention speaker in your own region, and then be, the Friday night regional speaker. And so I got prepared if anybody knows me. So yeah, I'm real sensitive. I get that from my mama. And, instead of beating myself up today about it, I realize it's just the way that God made me. And what is great about being clean in Narcotics Anonymous is that most of my tears today are over joy and over gratitude. And it's not, and not just the gifts that come into my life, the gifts that when I sit in my home group, here it comes already, or I'm just around guys that I sponsor, and I watch the light bulb come on, and I watch them get excited about, being a member of Narcotics Anonymous and learning about service. And one of the gifts of being clean, and let's talk about the theme, one fellowship, one family. And I think that's even more appropriate right now for kind of where I'm at in my life and some of the gifts that God, has given me. And I've got to experience some things here lately that are just, one of my favorite lines in the basic text is that our dreams are only glimpses of what God has in store for us. And just here recently, I got to experience some of those gifts. And God sees fit for me to talk about that later. We'll talk about that. People are like, "Are you nervous? You doing okay?" And I'm like, man, I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be. I prayed this morning. I cried when I prayed out of gratitude. And I got a couple guys in my life that are real important to me, and one of them was here. I asked him to be here, and then another guy said he couldn't make it, but he was going to be with me on the phone. So we go upstairs into the hotel room, and the guy that's with me, we've been brothers for like 22, 23 years. And the other guy, he's on the phone, and we held hands and we prayed. And that's to keep me out of the way, and allow God to speak through me. I never get up here to write notes. I just feel like whatever I'm supposed to share and convey tonight is what God wants me to convey, One of the biggest gifts about being clean, I think, or one of the biggest gifts from staying in Narcotics Anonymous and staying clean for a long time is that when you get asked to do this, there's not enough time to talk about the gifts that happen in recovery to us while we're on this journey. And that's been so true in my life. And it's just amazing that I'm standing up here and doing this. I got this prayer that I say all the time, and I say it when my trust gets really low. Even though I have all this experience in my life that God's working in my life, I have this prayer, and it was taught to me when I had a few years clean, and I pray it a lot, and I teach. I suggest it to guys that I sponsor, and so when my trust gets really low, or I start to question what's going on, and is this God working in my life? I ask God to show me in ways that I can see, feel, and understand as a human being. Is this you, God, working in my life? So when I got asked to speak for the Friday Night Regional Speaker, I was so honored and so happy but super nervous. And I called Jimmy and told him, and he started laughing. And then was excited for me. And so I said this prayer, and I was like, okay, God. So I said this prayer, and I got music on my phone. And I got like extreme variety on my phone. And so I hit play, and the first thing that came up was Irish bagpipes. And my ancestry is Irish. And then the second song came on, it was Irish bagpipes. And I'm like, all right, I get it. Clear. So I'm going to talk about just a little bit about where I come from. If you're new and this is your first convention, welcome. Welcome. We are glad you are here. And let's give a hand for those people. So I don't usually like to say this, but I think it's important to say this from time to time, and I'm going to say it tonight because it has nothing to do really with me. I mean, I think about my recovery. There are times since I've been on this journey that I did not stay clean on my own. That God, God kept me clean. It wasn't my doing. And but I got clean on July 6, 1987. I was 16 years old, and I'm 49 today. I've been clean in Narcotics Anonymous since. And at my very first convention, which was, I think, the 7th ABCNA, I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia, and the ABCNA is the annual Virginia, the regional convention of Virginia. And my first one, I think, was the 7th, and it was in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I bought my first, NA piece of jewelry from Mr. Bill. And I've known him ever since. And so it's great to look in the crowd and see you here. Also, all the people that are here tonight, my home group is a home group that's in the East End area. It's called NA Vaders. We meet on Monday nights in Lawrenceville at 7:30, and if you're ever close by, we would love to have you. And that's where I get a lot of my recovery. So I'm so grateful for the members that came here tonight to support me. I got a bunch of other people here in the crowd that other meetings I go to that wanted to be here, and there's guys I sponsor, and there's men and women that I serve with. So I'm just really honored to be here up here. I got asked to share my experience, strength, and hope, and it's really our experience, strength, and hope. The longer I stay clean, we are so much more alike than different, no matter where we come from. And, I'm going to talk a little bit about where I come from. I'm the youngest of 9 kids. The spread is huge. The oldest is, I think she's 72, and I'm the youngest at 49. And so the parents that raised me versus the parents that raised them were very different. And we didn't have a lot of money, but I got away with murder as far as like, I've always said that I think by the time that I came around, they were just exhausted. And my brother, the 2 oldest each had a son that was 5 years old by the time I was born. So I was born an uncle. I got 2 nephews that are older than me. So anyway, and I come from a really good family. They're very proud of their heritage. Most of the kids have Irish names, and we're a super close family. And my parents instilled that, and my brothers and sisters have continued that tradition with birthday get-togethers. All the grandkids have grown up together. My mom passed this past March, and last year I was at GRCNA, and I got the word. We were texting Friday night. There's more to that story, and I'll talk about that later. But I was at GRCNA when the news came that my mom passed, and I got in the car. We were going out to eat, and I'm going to forget who was in the car, but I think it was Zach and Aaron, and it was Mike and Jeremy, and there was somebody else. And my lips started quivering, and I was like, my mom just passed, And that process was actually a really spiritual process, but I'll talk about that later. I had a really good childhood, and I talk about that because society tries to put us in a box, and it says that addiction and addicts only come from broken homes, and only come from abuse, and only come from this and this and that. And I had this great childhood. I wasn't abused. I felt loved and a part of that family. And I knew that I was loved, and I had a big sister. Closest sibling to me is my sister, who's 6 years older. I got to tell you this story that's really funny though. When I started using, I think around like 11 or 12, and I got clean at 16, and so that ought to tell you that the progression of my disease was quick. And I went from just like the rest of us, curious, and then getting high and having a good time. And then like the last year of my addiction, I was on the streets. I did things that made my skin crawl, and I did things that I couldn't wash that shame off of me. By the time I got clean, I'd been arrested in 2 different states, and I'd been to 3 treatment centers at 16. So that's just where my bottom was. And thank God, because I probably wouldn't have seen, 18 or 19 or 20. But I got to tell you this story. So my sister she's not an addict, and she just has this incredible walk of faith. And I know that everyone has these feelings and these stories too. And if you ever think about, like, you look at your sibling and you go, I know we're related by blood, but I just could not believe we were this different, And I'll start to question, like, are you really my sister? And so when I was growing up and I started using and I started getting into using, I'm upstairs and I'm blasting Jimi Hendrix. I'm listening to Jimi Hendrix really loud. I have a brother that was in the rooms, and he was like, yeah, when I started coming over and I started hearing you listening to Jimi Hendrix really loud, I knew you were getting high. And so anyway, at dinner time, back in my family, they would say, come and get it, really loud. And I was flying down the steps, and we sat at our dinner table was like a picnic, for a lot of kids, like benches and everything. But anyway, I come screaming down the kitchen, and I slide across the seat, and I say, I'm a voodoo child. And my sister looks at me and says, I'm a child of God. And I knew right then and there, you know what I'm saying? There's something wrong here, So, anyway, like I said, I just started using out of fun. I mean, I look at the disease in my life way before I ever picked up drugs, and it was alive and well. I used to like to start fires. I used to like to watch fire. I used to like to break things and vandalism. And we started stealing. Not like you could get any money for them. You know, back in the day where every car has an emblem, we used to go around and steal all those and like put them in a shoebox. I think it was just the rush of getting away with stealing. And all that behavior was there before I started using. You know, I have a brother anyway, Mom and Dad said, you know, went to the brother. He had been in and out of recovery, and I guess at that time he'd been clean, and they said, you know, basically go help your little brother. So he took me to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting. I think it was in 1985, and he bought me my first basic text. You know, there's a 21-year difference in age there. That meeting is the oldest meeting in my hometown. It's been there for 40 years. They just had their 40th year anniversary, and so when I go to places like that, I feel His Spirit. You know. In 2013, my brother introduced me to Narcotics Anonymous, and long story short, you know, eventually I got clean and he was clean, and you know, he had been a member of NA for, like, he went to his first detox when he got back from Vietnam, and he was in and out and in and out, and he got clean in the 80s, and he was one of these addicts where it's the strangest thing. He'd get a year clean and he'd relapse, like go out and use for like 2 days, come back in, pick up a white key tag, go stay clean for like 3 years, do it all over again. And he did that for like decades. And he built up, he had a very successful business, and he built up, you know, houses and cars and all these things. And he never lost any of that because he would go out and use for a week, you know. And anyway, you know, when I was up and coming in the beginning of my recovery, you know, I know other people have different experiences, but I didn't have a lot of people that died around me in Narcotics Anonymous. I think I knew a few. I remember when we lost a home group member and he overdosed, and I remember where I had a guy that I was friends with that I used to dance. You know, he would have a girlfriend, I would have a girlfriend, and we would dance at NA dances, and he relapsed and he died. But anyway, we've had a lot of death here, a lot of death. And to give you an example, I've been going to Virginia a lot to spend time with my family. In like a 2-week period, we had lost 3 people in Atlanta, and then Richmond had lost 3 people. So it was like 6 people that had died, you know, that were members of NA that had gone out on relapse and they had died, you know, in like 2 weeks. And in 2013, my brother had been on a really long relapse. And there's a couple guys I'm really close to in Richmond that had sponsored him on and off. And he just couldn't stay clean, and we watched the destruction. And the disease is progressive, and he lost everything. And I got 2 pictures on my phone of him. One when he's clean, and he's like glowing, and he's smiling. And then, you know, soon before he died, you know, just this, you know, half of a man, you know, that how we look, you know, when we're in the grips of addiction. And he died in 2013 from a drug overdose on a relapse. And man, I feel him really strong tonight. And I know that we've all lost loved ones and we've lost members. And I know that I say prayers all the time for all the parents, man. I just could not imagine what it would be like. But I saw my mother, you know, my father had just died the year before. And I just can't imagine what it's like to be a mother and to bury, you know, a son before you pass. And, you know, the fellowship, man, came out big time at that funeral from the hometown and the guys that used to sponsor him. And it's just a whole nother feeling.
to have the man that 12-stepped you, that it was your brother, and bought you your first basic text, and to see him dead in that coffin, and he didn't die from a car wreck, you know what I'm saying? He died from a drug overdose on a relapse, And the only difference between me and him was that, he lost the willingness. He lost the willingness to work a program. He lost the willingness to practice principle. He lost the willingness to be of service, He lost the desire to stay clean. And when he was in that coffin, and I'm so grateful that, I'm so grateful for the message he carried to me, and I was able to put my 20-year medallion in his pocket, And just a few days ago, I was going through pictures, and I know some of you that are friends of mine saw what happened when I went through those pictures, what I put up on the internet. But I found this handkerchief, and the handkerchief said March 31st, I don't know what it was. It was a couple years after he passed. Maybe it was 2014 or whatever. And I had written on there, grieve and regret, And so for the people that have lost, brothers and sisters and parents, you're not alone, and today how he motivates me is that I've always believed in being of service in Narcotics Anonymous, and I was taught to never say no, and I try to never say no when I'm asked to be of service in Narcotics Anonymous. But now experiencing the death of him and putting that medallion in his pocket, and it just, the readings take on a whole nother meaning, and when I don't want to necessarily say yes, watching him on that relapse and us losing touch of him and him not being able to get clean again and him dying, it motivates me even more to never say no, because when we say no, addicts die. And I used for whatever that was, 5-6 years, and I had been to a couple different treatment centers. I didn't want to, I was just trying, the brother was trying to get me clean for mom and dad, and I was just, BNSing and to get the heat off my back. And anyway, on July 6, 1987, I lived on kind of a busy street, and had turned commercial, so it was like half residential, half commercial. And my dad and I, like the whole family was out in the driveway, and my father and I were like throwing down. And the police pulled up, and they were like, "Mr. Costello, do you need some help in this situation?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "I got a junkie for a son." And man, I remember, I've never forgotten that. I've never forgotten that shame. Only addicts have experienced that level of shame, and that was more hurtful and harmful than any type of punishment I had ever gotten. And that was like at the bottom of active addiction, and it where I was numb and not feeling anything, and that hit me like a ton of bricks, And so I went to treatment, and I got a little bit different story about this, and that is I wasn't willing to get clean on that day. I was forced to get clean on the first couple of hours of that day. So they put me in a car, and I had like a brother on this side, my dad, and a couple other people, We were driving up to Northern Virginia, and we were doing like 70 miles per hour, and I'm still thinking that if I can get out of this car and I can roll, will I survive? And so what happened was I got into that parking lot of that treatment center, and there was a split second when we got out of the car that I had time to run, to haul ass. And something came over me. And today I know what that was. It was a loving, caring God working in my life, And that split second was to run, and then the Spirit, God said, let's try this. You know what you've done, and that doesn't work. Let's try this. And I surrendered on that day, and I broke down and I cried, and I said, I can't do this, and I need help. And the treatment center I went to was absolutely crazy, but I was willing to do anything it took to stay clean, and I was in treatment for over a year, and they didn't even allow me to go to NA meetings until I had like 7 months clean.
And so fast forward, I get clean, I start going to meetings in Richmond, Virginia, and I sit in these meetings, and I didn't look at the differences, man. I was so beat up and so whooped. I was scared of what was going to happen to me if I didn't go to meetings and I didn't do what these guys in my life were sharing with me, that if you want what we have to offer, you need to do what we do. And I was so scared of using, because I knew that if I didn't go to meetings and if I didn't do these things that they did, I knew that I was going to use. And I was so scared of the disease, of that happening again. And so, I started going to meetings. I was like 17, and I'm not lying. I looked like I was 12. And there's some people in Richmond that would attest to that are still clean today. And I didn't feel less than, you know what I'm saying? I really didn't. I didn't feel different than. I sat in meetings, and there wasn't anybody that really got clean that was around my age for at least a couple of years. So anyway, I started listening to this guy, and this guy started speaking to me. He would share in meetings, and I felt God. I felt like I wanted what this guy had to offer. And so, I hear sometimes people talk about sponsorship, and they say that they look for a guy or they look for a woman that they have similarities with, and my experience is not that way at all. So I asked this guy, Quivering in Voice or whatever, that he would sponsor me. He was my first sponsor in Narcotics Anonymous. And to talk about the gift of recovery, I've been clean 32 years, and I've been close and friends with him for 34. And he's not on this path anymore. He's on another path, and we're still really close. And boy, I had a hard time with that decision. So to kind of give you, so here I am, 17, 8 months clean, looking like I'm 12, and this guy that I asked to sponsor me is probably about 250 pounds. He was a Special Forces combat Vietnam vet. He was half black, half Native American, and he was gay. And none of that mattered, He was an addict, I was an addict. We had the disease of addiction, and we had recovery in common. And that, I reached out to him last night. I sent him some texts and let him know, and what was going on here, and he sent me back some really, sweet, nice messages. And I said, I'm going to talk about you tomorrow night for saving my life, and he did, and God worked through him, and he worked through a lot of people. There's a lot of people that, God, just like my home group, my friends, guys I've sponsored in the past, old timers that are here, people like Kim N and Mark and Dana G and all these people that I'm serving with right now on the Georgia History Committee, that I just owe my life to, that I just couldn't be any more grateful. And then there's a bunch of addicts that have died clean, and people like Mike C. and Billy E. and different guys that just absolutely saved my life. And so funny, we were hanging out talking one night in a meeting or whatever when Billy was still alive. Mr. Bill knows who Billy was, and he picked on. He's like, "Yeah, Seamus will cry right up in a meeting," and. So I asked this guy, and this guy, we were real close in clean time, but he had already had so much more experience on the steps, and yeah, back then we didn't have the step guide. We used these Xerox copies, and I had to and the guys I sponsor today, they'll know this homework assignment. So I had to read the step out of the basic text. I had to read it when we got It Works How and Why. I had to read it out of that. I had to bring it up as a topic in a meeting. I had to talk to a man and a woman that had some recovery about what did they get out of this step when they shared it with a sponsor. And I had a dictionary, and I had to look up all the words in the step, and I had to write down what I thought they meant and then actually what Webster said they meant. And he said things like to me like, Seamus, we need to go to dummy school because you need to unlearn all the things that you think you know, And we're going to look up what these words really mean, not what you think they mean. And I was so grateful for that, so grateful. And he, the basic foundation of me came through God and came through that man and came through the other men in my life. And he taught me what it was like to be, he taught me that these things that I believe in today started there. And that was that, home group is the highest level of service. That sponsorship's the backbone of Narcotics Anonymous. There's people in my life that think this is funny, but there's things that I came to believe in those early days that I still believe in today. And some of them are extreme, but people kind of know me that, and these are the things that they taught me. And one of the things they taught me was, Seamus, I'll give you an example. So when I had like my first home group, and I got my first real girlfriend in NA, we were both home group members. And we skipped the home group one night for a date. And I've been clean 32 years, and I had about 18 months at that time. I've never forgotten that talking to. I'm not going to use the language he used, but basically he said, when we make a commitment to a home group and we put our name down on that list, that means we're going to be there every week, and we're going to come early, and we're going to set up, and we're going to chair meetings, and we're going to stay late, and we're going to clean up, and we're going to go out afterwards. And these other meetings that you go to, like I said, he didn't use this language, you can mess around with. But this meeting, your ass is here every week regardless. He said, you don't miss your home group unless it's for a funeral, and it better be yours, Seamus. That sounds extreme, but recovery was very extreme at that time. And, just like most people, I was so whooped that if you had told me, like what we talk about, if you told me to strip down naked, and run down the street, I would have done it, how much respect I had for the disease of addiction, and I knew what would happen to me if I picked up again. And, I just got such fond memories. Back then when flyers, that's like people writing stuff on paper and Xeroxing it. And so when flyers hit the table of all these Narcotics Anonymous events, whether it would be in North Carolina or Virginia or whatever, we all piled into cars and we caravan and we went all over the place. And he taught me that, and still today, a lot of people know that I'm all about asphalt recovery, but that's where it came from, was those men in my life. And what that did, I was so grateful for that, because, what it did for me is it showed me that Narcotics Anonymous was way bigger than just my little area where I went to meetings at. It showed me that there were addicts in Maryland, or there were addicts in North Carolina that I was sitting meetings with at a convention or a camp out or whatever, and they would share the same feelings and the fears and the struggles, and they cried the same tears over the gratitude that we were clean today, And I share with people, I'm like, man, I'm so grateful for that, because if I had stayed in one little area, what would have happened to me was that I would have gotten bored. And then I would start thinking that I know what you're going to say before you say it, and then it wouldn't be the we, the fellowship would become you people, and I would cop that resentment, and if I stay there long enough, I'm going to pick up, and the times in my recovery where things got boring or whatever, the suggestion was go to different meetings, Seamus. And it's just amazing, man. I'd go to different meetings and I'd hear the same message, and I would hear it because who was sharing, I didn't know them, and I didn't know any of their struggles or their baggage or whatever. And
I'd go back to my sponsor. I'd be like, man, you won't believe what I heard in this meeting. And he's like, Seamus, we just talked about that 2 days ago. You know that, I know everybody can relate with that. So, when you're obsessed and whatever, fill in the blank, whatever it is, and, the pain has gotten a little bit great, but I'm not really willing to surrender yet. And, I'm volunteering for more and more ass whoopings. And so I go to my sponsor and I share with him and ask for help or whatever. And he starts sharing with me all these solutions, and I'm looking at him and I'm shaking my head like I understand, like I'm hearing him. But I'm like, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing anyway. You know what I'm saying? So I'm grateful today that, God, it's just taken a long time that there's behavior that I used to do in Narcotics Anonymous. Financial irresponsibility. I mean, like big time. Bouncing checks and floating checks and inappropriate sexual behavior. All kinds of things that I used to do where the insanity of the disease, we talk about what insanity is, and that's insanity is repeating the same behavior over and over again, expecting different results. Where the disease progressed for me is when I got clean and I got into Narcotics Anonymous, a new level of insanity came about, and that was, I know what's going to happen, and I'm going to do it anyway. Because my self-centeredness was, I want what I want when I want it. And I'll deal with the consequences after this rush. And through a lot of step work and a lot of time, what started happening was the steps started working. And slowly but surely, I started loving me, respecting me, honoring me, caring about me more than I was willing to get that rush. And the other side is, man, I'll sit in meetings sometimes, and I've sat in meetings sometimes, going through a resentment, thinking about how much I think I, strongly dislike somebody, and I have these violent fantasies in my head, and I'm like, you know why you can't act out on that, Seamus? You know why? Because the next time through the steps, you're going to have to put his name on a list, and you're going to have to make amends. And you're struggling right now with, the undealt with resentment. Just think how you're going to feel when you have to make face-to-face amends. And talking to a sponsor at different times in my recovery where, he would share with me that, for us to stay clean, those things are a must, no longer, that insanity I talked about, that's no longer acceptable. When we talk about we have a set of steps today to believe in and to practice. One of the things I guess I want to share up here tonight is that I've experienced some miracles in my life since I've been here that are just absolutely the result of being clean and being a member of Narcotics Anonymous. And if I can share anything with the newcomer, and that is, just keep coming back, and yes, meetings, and yes, home group, and yes, service, and yes, traveling, and yes, conventions. But the real change comes from the steps. And I just experienced somewhere 30 years ago, we were going over a step, and I started to dream, and the sponsor said, what are some dreams that you have now that you're clean? What are some just unbelievable things that you want to experience? And one of them was going to San Francisco and going to experience the redwoods. And I just got back from that bucket list. And I'm telling you, I was like, I have family there. And it was unbelievable. And I'd been there for like a day and a half, and I'm not kidding you. I was in this vehicle, and I like literally, I pinched myself. And I said, you're here, man, and you're still clean, and you're experiencing this. And so we went to see the redwoods, and I can't even explain to you that spiritual awakening. And I'd put my hands on them, and I would just feel the life inside that tree, and I would feel the density, and it felt like I was in reality, but it felt like I was walking through a dream, you know. And I started noticing, and we started walking, and I started noticing that all these trees grew in these circles of one another. And I guess sometimes when you'd see singular ones, it was other trees had died. And I started seeing these big circles, and then some of the, you know, the description that you would read about or whatever talked about that they grow in these circles. And I thought to myself, here the world teaches self-sufficiency, and here are these trees that have lived through every natural disaster you can think of, and earthquakes and mudslides and fires, and they're 900 and 1,000 and 1,100 years old, and they grow in these family circles. And that's like the we here, you know. And I'm telling you, man, the Spirit of God, you know, was so alive in that. And I was able to look at those family unions. And the other thing they talked about was when one dies, I saw this circle of one, and there was one kind of in the middle, and it had died through fire. And it was like they talk about that they drop all these seeds, and it was like the trees drop all these seeds for, you know, new trees to grow. And even when there's one that had died, they still, you know, can grow in this circle, like they're, you know, paying respect to their elders, you know. And I know that might not make a lot of sense to you, but it was like having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, you know, in that forest that day. And the other thing that was really neat is that I grew up with this niece, and she lives out there now, and she's got 2 kids, and her and her partner have 2 kids. One's 8 and one's 5, and the 5-year-old is an Aquarius like me, and we kind of talked about that. You know, he's 5, and I'm like, we're 4 days apart. And I was telling Amy, I'm like, you know, these are traits of an Aquarius, and she's like, yeah, he already has some of that. And anyway, a few days later, when you know, we're off doing San Francisco stuff, and Amy texts me, and he says, Jesse wants to know where you're at and when can he see you again. And you know, and I'm here to tell you that if I'd never gotten clean, you know, no child would have felt that way, or I wouldn't even be out there, you know. And on this journey, that sponsor started teaching me all about that, and he started teaching me about the steps, and he started teaching me about Narcotics Anonymous. It was a worldwide fellowship, and he started talking to me and teaching me about our literature and where our literature came from, and you know, we still do it today in my home group, and that is, you know, when the car comes out, we would have these extra group consciences where we go over to another home group member's house and we order pizza, and we'd be there all day going through the car and voting, and it was just such a neat experience, and it still is today, to be involved, you know, in that process. And, you know, it's like when I started looking up those words in that first step, and it talked about we, and that is a group of people, including myself, that I'm a part of that we, you know. And I'd hear people, you know, I try to be a loving, caring person, and I'm not trying to come off any better than anybody. I have some personal experience, and I'm going to share this tonight. You know, it is what it is. And that is, you know, I would hear people in early recovery say, I'm powerless over people, places, and things. And you know what? When I got out of treatment and I was terrified to share and open my mouth in a meeting, I mean, I'd have sweat pouring down my armpits, and my palms would be sweating like they are now. And I just kept sharing. You know, I was like, you know how I got through that? I kept talking. And, you know, I probably said the same thing because I was just kind of parroting what was taught to me in treatment. But I learned that I'm not powerless over people, places, and things, that the steps 2 through 12 give me that power.
And, if people don't believe that, I have the power here today to make people feel welcome in Narcotics Anonymous. When that newcomer walks in the door, I have the power to give him a hug and write my phone number down and sincerely say, call me before you pick up and call me for a ride, and I'll pick you up and take you to a meeting. But I also have the power not to make someone feel welcome here, and I've done that, and I've had to make amends for that behavior. And then places, I was taught early in recovery that if I'm going to a family function and there might be some type of drug, being served, that I drive my own car, that I can come and I can go as I please. And then people, places, and things I have the ability to pick up things, put things down. I have the ability to build things, and I have the ability to destroy things, And one of the biggest things that were taught to me in my early recovery, sometimes we would share at a meeting or whatever, my grand sponsor or somebody would look over at me and they would put a V on their forehead, and that was them picking on me, saying, Seamus, we are no victims today. We are only volunteers. And, and that's when I get in the most trouble in my life today, is that when I raise my hand for whatever self-obsession that's going on in my life, I raise my hand as a volunteer and I say, come on and get me some. And then, sooner or later I come crying to Jimmy with an ass whooping. And sometimes I talk to him about decisions that I'm thinking about doing. And he'll say, Seamus, let's not forget the last time you made a decision like that and what happened. So that's what the steps are for, The steps are for continuing to clean out that wreckage. I'm kind of going to skip around. I just wanted to kind of talk about some key things here. The first 4-step I did in Narcotics Anonymous is an important thing to talk about. Before that 4-step, I got raised in a certain religion family, and when I got clean, man, I had a resentment against God, and it was as big as this room. And anyway, I was on that 3rd step. And we were, trying to come, and they shared with me, let me back up really quick. In the 2nd step, my experience is what that sponsor taught me, and it's what I believe today, and it's what I try to give away when I'm asked to share a step with a sponsee, and that is that, a power greater than myself is not a God in my life. We don't get into God until 3. And that in step 2, we talk about a power greater than ourselves, which could be literature, could be a meeting, could be, another recovering addict, it could be feelings. I still pull off the side of the road and I see those guys begging for change. That's a power greater than myself, because I have no doubt that if I pick up, that's where I'll be. And he said that it's anything that points out the insanity of your disease. And God, man, if the experience of a 2nd step in action, when finishing that 1st step and feeling that big hole and feeling that emptiness and that vacuum, and then God designed, God knew what He was doing when He designed step 2, because it's all about hope in that step. And there's a guy here tonight that I sponsored, and we did a 2nd step, and I remember that light bulb coming on with him, and him waking up and realizing that, it's about trusting the process. And a 2nd step in action is like I go to a meeting and I'm ate up with fear and I'm like hurting really bad, and I don't want to share in the meeting. I don't want to get honest. I don't want to ask for help because I feel different then, and I'm listening to the disease in my ears, and someone else shares in the meeting before me and they share the exact same struggle, and that I get back out of the I and I get into the we. And man, the beginning of that process, there's some hope that's involved in that, and it helps me continue to go further. The next time, I can go through that. I'm like, these are lies, Seamus. So we get into 3, and I'm ate up with this resentment against this guy that I was brought up with, and and the sponsor talks about. He says, right out of the basic text, he says, all this God has to be, Seamus, is all loving, all caring, all powerful, all knowing, and all forgiving. And I took that right out of the text. I slapped God on it, and that worked for me for many, many, many years until I got to a 7th step later on that I wanted something a little bit more than that, and I started doing some work in that area. And he talked to me about what was my will and what was my life and what was I making the decision to turn over to the care of this God. And he talked to me about, and I looked these things up in the dictionary, and what was my will? My will was my choices. What was my life? My life was acting out on those choices, my day-to-day affairs. And that's what I'm asking this loving, caring God to care for. And I went into this 4-step, and that treatment center that I was in for a year, I shared like all my deep, darkest secrets there. I mean, I shared all the ugliness. And I had to do it in front of like 70, 100 guys, and I did it a lot because it was kind of required of me to share that. And so when I got into Narcotics Anonymous and I started writing on this 4-step, I wasn't fearful about all that. But where the disease started talking to me was that you're different than, you're less than, you're more broken, you're sicker than others, because I had to write about the stuff that I was shameful about that I had done clean, and then I couldn't use the excuse of active addiction. And so some of y'all might think this is funny. It wasn't funny at the time, but I tried to write this perfect 4-step. And in the meantime, it got too painful, and I would put it down for months at a time, and I wanted to write this perfect 4-step. And what happened was I'd put down this 4-step out of fear because I didn't want to feel these feelings and face these things that I had to face. And what happened was every time I put the pen down, I just added more to the step, because of trying to run away. And anyway, I stayed on that step for almost 3 years, 4-step, after doing one verbally over and over and over again in treatment. That step was like 300, 400 pages long. I'm not lying to you. I still got it. And my sponsor, we were talking about resentments, and we were talking about, and I was like, every resentment I ever thought about or had, I wrote down. And we were talking, and I was like, yeah, I got 100 pages on resentments. He was like, whoa, that's not what this is for. We're going to pick 3 or 4 to try to see some patterns here, So to kind of piggyback on what Jimmy said, about talking from Macon to Atlanta, it started a long time before that. So anyway, we share this 5th step, and the freedom, there was an air of freedom that I received from that 5th step that I became a changed man, that I was never that person again. And the freedom came from, being able to share all of those things, that I raised my hand for and being clean. And, he shared similar things with me. I did not feel alone. I did not feel different. And I do that today, like I have some friends, I have some guys sometimes that are in my life that I sponsor, and they're like, most people who are in my inner circle, they don't say, or they know me, so they don't say these things anymore. But back before, when they were getting to know me, they were like, man, I met you, and I thought you were all spiritual, and you had all this clean time, and then we went out one night, and man, you're sick. And so yeah, I was like, that's why I keep coming back. I don't know about you, but I got favorite steps and I got least favorite steps. And my least favorite step is a 6th step. And almost every 6th step I've ever done has just been extremely painful because I have not gotten to the surrender of those defects until like the bitter ends. And I'm still very pain motivated. I can be motivated today out of joy and out of gratitude, but I'm still very pain motivated. And the last 6th step I did with Jimmy, I think it was the first 6th step that I experienced in my recovery where it wasn't like that. But let me share something with you when I had like the 6th step I did around 14 years clean was that one thing that I was really plagued by for years in my recovery was a deep sense of insecurity and a deep sense of low self-esteem. And that came out a lot of times in jealousy. It came out in feeling less than. And at the time, I was dating who eventually became my wife and then ex-wife. I was dating her, and we were at this fellowship party, and I was just absolutely out of my mind with jealousy, you know. And I had to call my sponsor, and you know, I mean, I was just crazy. And that was the surrender of that sixth step. And this is where it was at. I was on the side of my bed, on my knees, crying, snot running down my nose, 16 years clean, talking to my sponsor's voicemail. You know, and that's where that surrender came from, you know, of being entirely ready for God to remove those defects of character. And man, let me share something that was just, you know, incredible that happened to me in my first 7th step. So I was in this situation, and you know, I think God has had to show me direct evidence of what these steps have, you know, been about. And so I was in this situation with one of my biggest defects at the time, which was lust. And I was in this situation, and it was a woman that I was, you know, I had 2 years clean, she had a year clean, or whatever the case may be. And I was in this car, and I had all the opportunity in the world to act out on this defect. And I felt this presence, you know, and that's just my experience. You know, I don't mean to sound, you know, the way, but I just felt this presence that I don't have to live this way. I don't have to, you know, treat another human being this disrespectful, you know, and I don't have to act out on this today, you know, and that's, you know, that's not me. That was a God of my understanding, you know, removing that shortcoming from my life. And for me, that was huge, because that was a defect of mine that at different times in my recovery had ruled me. And that had never happened before. It had never happened where I had like the green light and I wasn't willing to go there because it hurt too much, and I wanted to love me more, and I wanted to be a friend, and I wanted to respect more than I wanted to act out. And that was life-changing for me. And then we go on to the 8th step and making this list, and it's kind of back where I talked about before, is that I became willing to make this list. And one of the things I want to talk about is one of my future 8 steps down the road. And so anyway, in Narcotics Anonymous, we get friends here, we grow close, we travel together, we watch people get married, we watch people have babies, we're involved in their life, and then whatever, we grow apart, we get resentful, relationships blow up, people grow separate ways. And I had this guy that I was like dear friends with, and we lived together and had all that history. And some things happened in recovery, and some things changed, and it got really, really ugly between us. And I thought for a good long while in Narcotics Anonymous that I just hated this guy. You know, not dislike, but like I absolutely hated him. And so he was on this list. And I knew recovery was really working when I had when this guy that I thought betrayed me and that I thought that I hated, that I got willing to make those amends. And I remember when I made them, you know, and I thought to myself, you know, I made these amends on the phone. I still remember where I was at, and we made some amends together face to face. And I thought to myself that, you know, what would God want me to do? You know, God would want me to forgive. You know, God would want me to make these amends and talk about my wrongs. You know, and you know, today, you know, we walked through that. It was painful, but today we love one another, and when we see one another, I give him a hug, and it's genuine love and genuine felt.
And those are the things that I try to share with the newcomers today, that, if you just keep coming back, that there are things that have happened in my life that are only from the result of being clean and working these steps. And one of the things I want to talk about, and there's some things that have, there's some things that are hard still to talk about, even though I've worked steps with them and all that. But I'm going to take a big risk tonight. And the risk is that at around 13 or 14 years clean, I met this woman in the rooms, and we dated. We took things really slow. She was older than me. She was a little bit more mature than me. I was terrified of every little level that we got in the relationship. And this woman became the love of my life, Anyway, we dated for like a year and a half. We stayed engaged for like a year and a half. Chris C. was my sponsor at the time in Marietta, and the time through the steps with him was really, he was helping me to leave boyhood and become a man and be able to marry, And I married this woman, and long story short, I think when I got married, I had 16 years clean. I think she had 15 years clean. All the typical NA, service resumes, and she had chaired Gretna, And anyway, long story short, we bought the house of our dreams down in the city of Atlanta. I was living the best life. Recovery had gotten so good, I couldn't believe it. And anyway, she came home from a business trip one day, and she had, like I said, I think 16 years clean, and she came home from a business trip, and she was crying, and she says, I've relapsed. I'm not going to get clean again. I'm going to keep using, and I don't love you anymore, and I want a divorce. And, my world went upside down, And, I knew what to do. I knew that I needed to call a sponsor. I needed to, I was in between sponsors at that time, and I knew that I needed to call a sponsor, go to a meeting, and I remember making the conscious decision to pull that plug and say, I'm not willing to walk through these feelings, And some of the things that went on at that time was, I was out cutting the grass, and we didn't have any kids, and we were agreeing to split everything. So that was before, I think they changed the law since then. But from the time she had that conversation, we were divorced, paper signed in 45 days. And so before we were selling the house, I was out in the backyard and I was cutting the grass, and I was pissed off at God and pissed off because I didn't want to feel these feelings that I was feeling. And she was using, and she didn't have to feel them. And I was so jealous of that, And at 18 years clean, I wanted to use more than I ever wanted to use because I didn't want to feel these feelings. And in that backyard that day, that very first step that I shared with that man in his one-bedroom apartment off of that Xerox copy, and at the end of that step, he looked at me, and we were like eye to eye. We were so close, we could have kissed each other. And he said, do you believe in your innermost self that you're an addict, that you have the disease of addiction, that you cannot use? And I said, yes. And that day I was cutting that grass, and I was so pissed off at God, and I wanted to use, and I didn't want to feel what I was feeling. And that step came back to me. And God said, and I said to myself, she might be able to use, but Seamus, you can't use. You're an addict, and if you pick up, it'll be jails, institutions, and death. And so this is where the intimacy, this is where the vulnerability comes. But, this is what I need to share because this is what God put on my heart today to share. And this is where the steps come into play. Only these steps, and this is some of the things I try to share with the newcomers is like, even the dreams that you come up with, like that piece of literature says, are only glimpses. So I do all this work with Jimmy on this relationship and this breakup and this big fifth step or whatever. And we share this fifth step, and even at the end of that, I still feel responsible for this divorce, And he looks at me, he's like, Seamus, he's like, none of this had anything to do with you. She didn't want to stay clean anymore. She didn't want to be married anymore. And slowly but surely, all of that baggage, all of that, what felt like hatred, all of that resentment, all of that hurt, all of that started to heal. And let me share with you how I knew that it healed. I was at a meeting one night. I was sponsoring this guy. We were at a meeting in the Easton area, and the meeting was over, and we were going out to eat, and I was pulling out my car, and I got a phone call. And, we've only talked, a few times since we've been divorced. Got divorced in 2005, and she called me up, and she was crying because this guy that she had remarried after me was divorcing her and taking her for a bunch of money. And I'm telling you, man, it just came over me. It just came over me was the compassion. And if anybody knew how she felt, I knew how she felt. And all that had been gone. All that had been healed to the steps. And it was just that pure compassion and sympathy for an addict that is suffering. And I'm here to tell you, man, that's not me. That's the steps of Narcotics Anonymous. And that's the type of stuff that I try to still keep coming back because I want more of that, I had a friend of mine say, Seamus, I would have told her where she could go. But it wasn't on my heart, And so there's things like that have just been mind-blowing to me since I've been here. How long do I have? Okay, it's about that time. So, see, Zach, I did good. Zach came to me before the meeting. People know me really well. And Zach said, Seamus, the meeting says 7 to 8:30. He says, I think they got that wrong. He's like, you're not going to be able to speak in just an hour and a half. And so my parents were really different. And what I mean by that is, like, my dad was like 6'2", my mom was 5'1". My dad was very stoic, wasn't able to show emotion. He was like, go to bed early, early at night, get up really early. My mother was like super sensitive. She would cry at a drop of a dime. She was 5'1". She was a night owl. My father was like this super like non-procrastinator. My mom was like, wrote the book on procrastination. And I'm a spitting image of her, and I'll give you an example, and that is my mother could talk so much that she could, that you would fall asleep and wake back up and she would still be talking to you. And so Jimmy, that's where I get it from. I want to talk about two more things and I'll shut up, and that's just the latest gifts in Narcotics Anonymous, and that is my mother passed this past March, and like I said, I was at GRCNA, and I remember people like Pat, and I was sitting with Jimmy and all these different people and riding in the truck with Jeremy and Zach and all of them, and the fellowship was just incredibly, walking up to me and hugging me and saying I'm so sorry and all of this. Well, 10 days prior to that, don't get me wrong, I was crying and I was sad, but my mother was 94 years old. She had 9 kids, 29 grandkids, 15 or so great-grandkids. My father died in 2012. They'd been married for 68 years. She'd lived an incredible life. And we had just spent all this time together, 10 days prior to GRCNA. And, all the amends had been made. There's been no wreckage there. All the money had been paid back. It was just this incredible relationship. And so she was in and out of reality, at different times when I would go up there. And so this last time I was up there, we spent the night and ate dinner or whatever. And I was going to go back home. And God said, you need to go back over there. And it was loud. It was one of those things. It wasn't like slight. It was loud.
And God said, you need to go back over there and you need to spend another night with your mama, because the last thing you want to do is be going down to 85 and she passed and you had an opportunity to go spend another night with her and you didn't, you know. And so I'll go over there and we have this, great night. Like I said, she's not all in reality, but I knew at this time she was in reality. And I was like, let's take pictures. She was a picture fanatic. And so we took pictures, and I said, I love you, Mama. And she said, I love you too. And I knew she was there, and she died 10 days later, and I was at GRCNA, and we were okay. You know what I'm saying? We were through the steps of Narcotics Anonymous. We were okay. And so I have this God in my life that still today knows that he has to show me like blatant evidence, And so I have a nephew who has played baseball his whole life, and he's a pretty good pitcher in college right now. I mean, I don't know, he might get drafted. And they put on social media that he pitched a no-hitter, and it was the first time he pitched a no-hitter since he was in high school. And I got together with him, and he talked about that game when my mom passed. He couldn't be at the funeral, and so he went back on the mound, and he put an A in that mound. My mother's name was Ann, and he pitched a no-hitter that day, And one thing I'm gonna close with, and that is, that peace that I have, through the steps of Narcotics Anonymous. My parents got to see me go from 16 years old to 40-some years old, 30 years clean in Narcotics Anonymous. They got to see me make all those amends. They got to see me pay all that money back. They got to see the son that when I got clean, I was so angry at this God, that I was raised on. They got to see that change to the point where I realized that I had a loving, caring set of parents that had this God in their life, and they wanted to give that to their son, and they saw that change happen through Narcotics Anonymous. And my mother's passing was a spiritual process, and my father's passing was a spiritual process. And I'll end with this because it's something like along these lines that I've talked about tonight that was absolutely nothing but the God of my understanding in my life. I share with people sometimes in meetings, we sit in meetings, and sometimes the presence of God, I can feel the presence of God in the meeting. Sometimes the best message I hear comes from the newcomer that's got 64 days clean. And I think, okay, God, I heard what I needed to hear tonight, but sometimes God kicks the door down. Sometimes the door fly off the hinges, And so when my father was passing, they were like, Seamus, you need to get up here. He'd been really sick or whatever, and you need to get up here. And I had some people I had a guy in my life help me get up there. And anyway, I walk into the hospital, and my father, the family's all around, and I know a lot of you had this experience, but he had this death look, and his eyes were gray, and anyway, I was like, Daddy, it's your son, Seamus, from Atlanta. And I knew that he looked at me, and I knew that he knew who I was, and I was there. And that night, when everybody left, my sister said, Seamus, we've all been taking turns staying with him, And she said, will you stay with him tonight, And I was like, sure. I said, I'd be honored to. And so everyone left, and I got, those chairs in the hospital where they think that they're a bed if you lay them down? So I had one of those, and I was like, Daddy, I was like, your baby son is here from Atlanta, and I said, I'm going to be with you tonight, and we're going to be all right. We're going to be okay. And he passed that night, I saw the last breath of him go out, And only through Narcotics Anonymous and working these steps that the death of a parent could be a spiritual experience. And when we were at the funeral home later on, I had a family member come up to me, a sister-in-law, and I know that she meant, well by this, but she asked me, she's like, man, how did that make you feel with him dying in your presence when it was just you and him in that room?
said, I felt honored. And he waited, you know, because on July 6, 1987, he tells the world that he's got a junkie for a son. And on February 15th, 2012, he waits for that son to get up to him from Atlanta to Richmond to die in his presence. That he felt safe enough to die in only my presence. And that's not me, man. That's the gifts of the steps from Narcotics Anonymous. And if you stay clean and you keep coming back, those are the things that can happen here. Thank you.
But she's the board. Who is learning, okay?